Today, a short trip to London in search of good eats. We'll visit markets, some famous suppliers, a very fine restaurant, plus several casual places and pubs. And there's a nice little neighborhood church here I'd like to show you. I spent a lot of time in London years ago when it was a world food destination, but I haven't been back since Brexit came into full force. I've suspected that the food scene has been suffering because of Brexit because I've observed a steady decline in the quality and abundance of British goods arriving here in Ireland. I hope my suspicion will be proved wrong. So let's see how things have changed.
Oh my God.
It's like a miracle.
Someone must have known I was coming because immediately out of Heathrow, riding the Piccadilly line into town, this poster greeted me. I'm generally reluctant to take pictures or video in a restaurant unless it's very casual or the food is so appalling that people need to be warned. I'm also reluctant to film if there are children about, so I haven't got pictures or footage of everything I'll be discussing. I have got some reasonably watchable file footage that I'll swap in as needed. So if I'm talking about food and you're looking at something else, that's why.
A paddy wagon, tourist office. Oh dear, oh dear.
I booked this one-bedroom flat for £266 a night, tax included. It's called the Coola London at number 8 India Street. It's part of a chain. We're between Tower Hill and Aldgate, an impersonal commercial neighborhood, but there are a few pleasant surprises just outside. The flat is comfortable and clean with a kitchen, clothes washer, dishwasher, free Wi-Fi, a gargantuan TV with internet access for YouTube and Netflix, all that good stuff. We went to the Imperial War Museum in Lambeth, which led us to our new favorite London pub, the Three Stags Pub. We had fish and chips and a burger and a few beers. The burger had to be well done, which I consider a criminal offense, but it was juicy and it tasted good. These very thick chunks off the fillet toward the head, they're tricky to cook. It's easy to overcook the batter while undercooking the fish, but they nailed it. And the oil was fine, not even a hint of oxidation or rancidness. All of the food was excellent, even the well-done hamburger. The chips are flawless, with a thin, delicately crunchy surface and light, fluffy interior. And yes, the thick ones and the thin ones are cooked differently and appropriately. The beers are all in fine condition. You know those pubs that serve real English ale and don't trouble themselves to refrigerate the other beers so you get a glass of piss-warm Pilsner? Well, this isn't that. Everything is correct. Temperatures, carbonation levels, or nitrogenation in the case of the stout. They could easily get away with lower standards since their clientele is more tourist than local thanks to busloads of museum goers. We love this place. Prices are more than fair. The house is open, comfortable, and gardeny. You get plenty of elbow room. And there's no music. It's paradise. Naturally, we wanted to try as many different places as we could in a short trip. This was the only one where we ate twice. We came back just for the beer and food, which means we sacrificed a novel experience in order to do this again, which I think tells you all you need to know about the Three Stags.
There we go. And there are your Three Stags, of course.
For dinner that day, we went to St. John in Smithfield, one of London's finest restaurants. It's had a Michelin star for quite some time, and it has been called the best restaurant in London and one of the best 50 in the world. And in the context of that much praise, my critique is going to be rigorous. The dining room is open and comfortable. The wine was great. I spotted a moderately priced Grenache that turned out to be light, drinkable, fresh berry flavors, not too acidic, not too tannic, quite typical, similar to a fine Gamay. It showed some subtlety and complexity on the nose and on the palate, but it's not something that an oenophile would contemplate or discuss. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. £60 I thought quite reasonable for a restaurant. The dining room is lit comfortably. The air is professional, but in no way stuffy. I've got no footage or even still pictures because there are signs asking customers not to use their phone. The service was exemplary. The staff are always alert. They keep a watchful eye on the tables, but always from a respectful distance. There's no fawning or pandering. It's first rate. I'll just run through the food quickly. The quail starter was fine, perfectly cooked, but literally just a quail on a plate. It could have used a little accompaniment, even just a little green salad or pickled beets and onion, something like that. It doesn't have to be anything cooked or fancy. The salt cod was a salad with a light dressing that did not get in the way, but definitely not enough cod. And the bone marrow was fine. How could it be otherwise? It's like butter made out of roast beef. These were standing, open at one end, and I kind of like them split and run under the salamander for a bit more char, but this was fine. The roast lamb was okay, a bit under, but not tragically, and it had some chopped fresh mint on the side. The braised beef cheek was excellent, juicy, gelatinous, beefy, soft but not pasty, just what you want. It had some grated horseradish on the side, something you don't see every day, a nice touch with an underappreciated ingredient. If the gravy had a little splash of red wine and maybe a subtle herbal hint like some fresh marjoram, it would have been a masterpiece. The blood cake sounded like heaven. It's homemade, so think about this. Starting with sautéed shallot, deglazed with a splash of brandy, minced blanched pork fat, some creme fraiche, flavored with mace and cardamom, cooked gently in a bain-marie until it just sets, say at around 80 degrees. Custardy and rich and silky on the palate. Blood is good food. Only the thing they served me was barely distinguishable from commercial black pudding. I'm pretty sure it wasn't made with oats, but some other grain, maybe semolina, maybe cornmeal, I don't know. But the texture was gummy and dense and clunky, and the flavor was bland. It was made in a tureen, and the slice I got had been pan-fried, too aggressively in my opinion. So it had this thick, plasticky crust covering both of the broad surfaces. Peeling them off left me with about 2/3 of the thickness I started with. The fried egg was an attempt at rescuing it, but let's face it, if you need egg yolk running all over a dish to make it palatable, you've already lost. I did not send it back because I doubt the kitchen was at fault. I suspect it met the brief. I just think it's conceptually bad, knowing what else they could have done with pork blood. Had I known it was basically supermarket-style black pudding, I'd have given it a miss. I'm certainly not going to blame the cook. Overall, it was an enjoyable evening, not expensive, and the service, as I said, could not have been better. I have to say the food fell short of my expectations for a Michelin star and all the extensive praise I've read online, but the ingredients were very high quality, and I have to give them serious props for resisting the temptation to charge extravagant prices just because they've got a star. This is an honest restaurant. I don't regret anything about the evening, except ordering the wrong dish. We went to Covent Garden for a planned lunch at a famous Chinese place, and by chance spotted a Shake Shack, a New York burger chain. They revived the old-school luncheonette griddle burger that I grew up enjoying as a kid. I've eaten at the original Shake Shack in Madison Square Park, and the burgers are a real nostalgia trip, just as I remember from childhood. So I was ready to call an audible until my lovely wife told me that Shake Shack is doing major business in Israel, which is a red line for the Greene family. So instead, we stuck to the original plan and went to Din Tai Fung, an upscale chain out of Taiwan that's famous for soup dumplings, or xiaolongbao. They've got 3 locations in Singapore, where my wife has eaten, and she raved about it. So this was one of our food destinations. Now, in my experience, outside of high-end hotel restaurants, Chinese food in London tops out at half decent. But this was crap. Overpriced crap. I paid £22 for a small plate of unseasoned supermarket-quality rice that they dared to call 2 servings. The noodles were made from cheap flour without character or flavor of their own, left unseasoned, tossed in plain sesame oil, and nothing else. The hot and sour soup was hole-in-the-wall takeaway quality, again unseasoned. No dried mushroom flavor, no vinegar, no bamboo. The only flavoring we were vouchsafed at the table was a tiny dish of vinegar, soy sauce, and ginger that you need to ration parsimoniously for your dumplings. You can't afford to use it on anything else. And the star of the show? The famous xiaolongbao? Oh, textureless wrappers containing unidentifiable fillings of bland flavor and questionable freshness. The service was organized, efficient, and crisp, almost military, which is typical for a turn and burn joint, which we knew we were walking into when they told us that we could have a table for 1 hour only. The locations in Singapore are excellent because the competition in Singapore is excellent. But if you're in London, steer clear of this ruthless tourist trap. And boycott Shake Shack while you're at it. For a quick, casual lunch, we tried Pizza Union, a popular chain with a location near our flat. We had noticed quite a few locals carrying their takeaway boxes during the lunch hour, so we figured it must be good. Pizzas are made to order and very cheap, like £6 for a basic pie, but it's very poor quality. Crust with no flavor, meaning cheap flour and no proper fermentation. Flavorless cheese. I'm not sure if it involves vegetable fat, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does. So-called tomato sauce is plain unreconstituted tomato paste. The pepperoni had a plasticky texture and might not have involved animal products. I don't know. They've got the fancy ovens to impress the tourists, and the pizza looks like the real thing, but even at these prices, I wouldn't recommend it. There's no decent cheese, no flavor. The pepperoni doesn't seem to be giving up any fat, so I'm not sure that it's authentic, like made from animal products. The crust has no flavor. There's no sourdough or anything even approaching it. It's just like a cracker. What an utter failure. Every single bit of this is failed. I mean, there's nothing good about it. Off to the market now. This is the famous Borough Market in Southwark, which, okay, it's a tourist trap. There's a lot of gimmicky stuff going on, but there is some truly excellent food here too. Well, at least there used to be. This chippy is very good, both the fish and the chip. There is no comfortable place to sit, but if you can cope with that, you can get a delicious lunch. I ate here during this visit, so I can recommend it. This fishmonger is good. You can see and smell that most of the product is very fresh. When you pick out a whole fish, always look for clear, convex eyes and pinkish gill. The eyes lose liquid and become cloudy and concave as the fish ages, and the gills darken and turn purplish. Some less than perfectly scrupulous fishmongers will cut the gills out so you can't use them to judge the fish. Ginger pig, a top-end butcher. Look at the marble on that beef. And notice he uses a knife until he reaches the bone and then saws through bone only. Sawing through the meat, it means you're a hack, even using a bandsaw. Slicing and then hammering your knife through the bone is disrespectful to the tool and again, not professional. These guys are pros. So when I saw the quality of the meat, the correct use of both knife and saw, and the aging fridge, I knew I was among friends. Look at those chickens. You see how dry the skin is? You could pick it up in your bare hand without being grossed out. That's how it should be. The supermarket plastic film is for the birds. Okay, sorry, I couldn't resist. The skin will stay wet, so it never gets crisp in the oven. And since most spoilage bacteria are anaerobes, the chicken doesn't keep well. These chickens, exposed to the air, will keep longer and the skin will get crisp. The plastics industry sold us on the idea that their wrapping was more hygienic. Ironically, it's less so. The pig carcasses are dry too, meaning they've been hanging correctly, not cryovacked.
They know there's something to eat, food to eat.
Does anyone know what these birds are named? They have an unusual and attractive call. So we're going to try a couple of prepared foods from Ginger Pig. A pork sausage roll and a traditional pork pie, which I'll bring home. Sausage roll looks good. Okay, it's inexcusably greasy. And the meat, what the hell is going on here? I'm detecting boar taint. Seriously. Boar taint is caused by failure to castrate male pigs before puberty. They produce a hormone and pheromone that the females apparently find irresistible, but humans of both sexes find quite disgusting. It accumulates in the fat and can be very pungent, so a relatively small amount, if it's distributed, can ruin a large batch of mints. I'm really surprised, and my wife agrees that the only place for this is in the bin. Let me time shift ahead to the pork pie, which I tried back at the flat. It's perfect. The meat, it's a bit dense, but it's got a nice short crust, it's got gelatin, and the meat tastes just as it should. Okay, back to the market. Now, I know that these people are experts, and I know that they're conscientious. The fact that a Brexit benefit slipped past them is not going to change my mind about that. I'm sure that when they hear about this, they'll make certain it doesn't happen again. I would not hesitate to buy from them in the future. Another famous supplier here is Neal's Yard Dairy, a cheesemonger at the very top of the food chain. This is one of the few companies that I trust automatically on the basis of their name alone. I've been a steady customer for 35 years. That old video about the omelet shortcut that I did back in 2006 when I was in D.C., yeah, the grated cheese is Montgomery's Farmhouse Cheddar from Neal's Yard. In Dublin, before Brexit, I would order directly from them online. Now their costs have risen and they no longer ship to retail customers outside the UK. So I haven't had any Neal's Yard for a few years and I'm really looking forward to it. The place is smaller than I remember. I was told that they closed half of the shop where they had been doing affinage and moved that process to a new facility. They've got 4 locations, so I guess it makes economic sense to consolidate that. I bought a few old favorites, so I could tell if there's any different. The Montgomery Cheddar and the Shropshire Blue, plus a few impulse buys and some milk, cream, and butter. It's painful to have to admit this, but the cheese was unremarkable, which, in context of this great company, means it was disappointing. The cheddar tasted like any supermarket cheddar, and it had the same waxy texture. The blue wasn't ready either. Neither had been aged properly. Simple as that. We had some soft cheeses that were a bit better. Not great, better. However, the milk, cream, and butter were all exceptional. So are the producers to blame? Are they cheapening the ingredients and methods they use? Or is Neal's Yard no longer doing affinage on a truly expert level? I would guess that they did more than just consolidate the maturation process, but might have gone further and replaced too many of their expert staff with inexperienced and unskilled employees. I think it's probably a compound failure in which British producers are also responding to economic pressure by cutting corners. Of course, I don't know for sure, but to me, this is nearly heartbreaking. This is a company I've admired and trusted for decades. We planned to go for Indian food in nearby Brick Lane, which is a thing, but it rained that night, so we went next door to Rajasthan 2 instead. It was a good decision because we had a quiet, inexpensive meal in a comfortable place. Mostly an after-work business crowd that was already thinning when we arrived, rather than the Brick Lane tidal wave of tourists. And the food, the same prices you'll typically find in Brick Lane. Starters for £5 or £6, mains for 14 to 18. The 650 milliliter bottles of Cobra were £6.90 a piece, so you can't ask for better in a restaurant. The flavors here are not the familiar commercial curry paste that all taste the same, reeking of cumin, coriander, and fenugreek. This was more like a family recipe kind of place. I think a lot of the curry sauces were made from scratch. They had an unusual take on butter chicken, which is typically made using tandoori chicken left over from lunch service or yesterday's dinner, and it involves a lot of butter and cream and tomato. Well, this didn't have any of those items. It used coconut cream and plain chicken white meat, and while it tasted good, I found it a bit sweet. The star of the show was lamb shank or mutton shank vindaloo. It was amazing. Soft but not pasty, unctuous, and the sauce was mercilessly hot but impossible to stop eating. Vindaloo sauce is mostly a puree of rehydrated dried peppers with some spices, sometimes onion, sometimes a little tomato. This wasn't too spicy. You got more of the pepper flavor and heat. I like a sour note with vindaloo, preferably from tamarind, but this didn't have that. I'm not complaining. I like the way they avoid Indian restaurant cliches. We had 3 starters, 4 mains, 3 beers, and extra rice and bread, and paid a grand total of £121, tax included, or $137 with tip. Service was professional, attentive but not pandering. It's a great place if you're okay with your curry not tasting like Patak's spice paste. We liked the Victoria pub just down London Street from Paddington Station. Great beer, great food, great service. A smaller room than the Three Stags, but every bit as good. We went on Sunday the 14th during the England-Spain football match, which was on TV, and you could hear a pin drop. I expected the place to be roaring with soccer hooligans, but I think it was a neighborhood crowd. So naturally, we decided to go back on Tuesday or Wednesday evening, and it was a completely different place, like Dr. Jekyll turned into Mr. Hyde. It felt like an after-work crowd with heaps of nervous energy. The place was so noisy and so tightly packed that we had no desire to stay. High-end British dining was a thing, I suppose starting with Marco Pierre White and the rise of the superstar chefs and their flagship restaurants. And it was a great period. But I sense that those guys just aren't engaged anymore. They're all talking bollocks on TV now. So I think that the midsection, for example, the better class of pub, is where the smart money is going today. I've got a hypothesis about why this happened. Now, I haven't got a big sample size here, but I have got a good eye and decades of experience, and what I saw in the specialty shops and high-end markets and restaurants, well, it's clear that Brexit has done real damage. Export restrictions and overseas duties have made it necessary to cheapen inputs, which could be almost anything. Hiring fewer expert staff and more unskilled ones, cheaper feed for animals, less care and attention for crops, maybe higher yield, cheaper crops altogether, cutting corners on ingredients, speeding up time-consuming processes. I mean, if yeast dough ferments for 16 hours instead of 24, you will taste the difference. Saving time is saving money, but the product will have changed, and not in a good way. Cutting corners adds up. Or maybe we should say it adds down. When an expert quality butcher like Ginger Pig is serving sausage rolls with boar taint, when Neil's Yard is selling incompetently matured cheese, you sense that the entire food supply has been degraded. But hey, you can't put a price on a blue passport now, can you? I'd like to leave you with a visit to the little church near our flat. I said the neighborhood was commercial and impersonal, but this place offers a real sense of community. It's called St. Botolph without Aldgate. He must have been a popular guy. There are others, like St. Botolph within or without Bishopsgate, and so on. He was apparently a patron saint of travelers, so there are churches named for him near the old city gates. There has been a church on this site since 1125, but this particular one was built in 1744. This display commemorates Robert Dow, a parishioner who left an endowment in his will benefiting the parish poor. The music you hear comes from the oldest church organ in England that still works. It's actually about 40 years older than the building. Above the galleries, there's some plasterwork involving heraldic emblems and, I guess, angels. I'm not sure the connection there, but it's quite nice. They have a children's playroom, which is a nice touch, too.
Simple altar. Nice looking, really. It's a little bit of a gem. And look at that organ. That's a pretty high ceiling. Or something. I'm not sure. I think. Yeah, children's area. Thoughtful. And looks quite decent. Let's have a look at that stained glass. It would be easier to see if the sun would shift
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the bits and pieces I've cobbled together here. I'll be back with some coffee content soon, so keep in touch. Cheers!